Today, my heart is about 30% synthetic material. It's about a 2% chance of survival if it happens this way. My heart split open right along the aorta from the carotid arteries all the way down to the base of the heart. I wake up, Nick, and it's like someone's punched a hole through my chest and is just squeezing the life out of my heart. One of the most dangerous things a leader can do to themselves, and that's to isolate yourself. I really believe that it was that isolation and anger that started bearing down on me. While I would wish this on nobody, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Welcome back to another episode of Limitless. Today we have with us Roy Reid. He's the founder and lead coach and creator of the Trust Transformation. I have his book with me here. I had the pleasure of meeting Roy myself over in Las Vegas at the Great Places to Work conference. It was definitely one of my highlights of North America. So I'm so excited to today be with Roy, even if not physically over in Florida, but at least we are here. Roy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm also excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, it's exciting, Roy. And isn't that the most beautiful with all these conferences and the connections we have around the world now, that we can continue these conversations and in such a meaningful way as having you on the podcast today.
It's amazing what technology lets us do.
Absolutely. And Roy, let's start right there. A couple of years ago, I know that something happened in your life. It was back in 2019 when we didn't even know about the pandemic yet. You were going through something in your life, and what intrigued me was that you call it even that what happened and what you will share with the listeners today became your second life.
That's absolutely true. In fact, it'll be 7 years on about a week from now that I suffered what's called an acute aortic dissection. What that means is that my heart split open right along the aorta from the carotid arteries all the way down to the base of the heart. And there's not a lot that you can look at that would predict something like this. Some people see it ahead of time. I would tell you that mine was a compounding result of a lot of lifestyle choices, but also a lot of pressure I've been putting on myself, as that looks like. And it unfolded just out of the blue. My wife and I had gone out one night, did the dinner out and the honeydew shopping at Home Depot for the weekend chores that I needed to do. Came home, watched a movie, and she went off to bed. I was going to watch a second movie, fell asleep on the couch, and about 2 a.m, I wake up, Nick, and it's like someone's punched a hole through my chest and it's just squeezing the life out of my heart. And I ran in the bedroom. I woke Kim up. We jumped in the car. We raced to the hospital. On the way, I had a stroke and became completely non-responsive. So they had to drag me out of the car, figure out what was wrong. And one of the nurses was able to determine that it wasn't a heart attack. It was a dissection, which meant that I was going to start bleeding out if they didn't get me to surgery. So they airlifted me from the hospital close to my house to the larger hospital in downtown Orlando. And for 6 hours, the team worked to replace the entire upper arch of the aorta. So today, my heart is about 30% synthetic material. It's about a 2% chance of survival if it happens this way. And the damage, the perceived damage was so bad that they put me in a coma with an idea that maybe if my body could just sort of regulate down, my organs would not suffer as much damage. My brain might or might not have long-term damage, and my heart just needed the time. So for a week, I laid in a coma, and no one really knew what the outcome would be. In fact, the whispers around the hospital were that there was no prognosis for a positive outcome, that if I survived, I would have that long-term brain damage and would likely need nursing care for the rest of my life. 7 days go by, they wake me up, and if you've not been awakened from a coma, it's a little bit like waking up in the middle of a plane crash. There's all kinds of craziness going on. There's all these noises and sounds, and people are telling you to calm down. And coming out of it, I've had a week of experiences in my mind that defined what I was going through. So while I kind of inherently knew I was in the hospital, it was just waking up in a strange place, not knowing why you're there, what's going on. But I had all my faculties. I was able to get out of bed at some point within the next week or so, and was in the hospital for a month, out of work on recovery for another 6 months, and then had 2 follow-up procedures following that to put stents in parts of the heart that had also been damaged because of the extent of what took place. But I started my journey, and it's been 2,549 days since that night. And I count each day and lean into it, and thank God for the mission, the medicine, and the miracles that He's provided.
Well, Roy, wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm obviously so incredibly grateful for the positive outcome this time. And Roy, I would like to go back to leading up to this incident. And you mentioned a few words. You said lifestyle and pressure and compounding over years. Can you elaborate a little bit more on those? Because I think there's a lot of listeners who's listening now who's going through that. There's a lot of pressure on their shoulders, and perhaps it's easy to pick up the unhealthy coping mechanism and lifestyles and so on. But I would love to hear from you if you can share a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the lessons for me was that as a whole person, you can't compartmentalize what happens with the body separate from what happens with the mind or the soul. And I was in a great job. I was executive director of communications for a large healthcare organization and had helped successfully navigate for them, leading the internal and external communications teams, the rebranding of the system to a national brand, the onboarding of a new CEO, and I did most, if not all, of the writing for him. So from the outside looking in, things were right. Where I was beginning to get frustrated is I became focused on what I thought the organization owed me, what I thought I should be getting in terms of opportunities for growth and promotion. And I was passed over a couple of times, and you start to kind of bear resentment for things that happen like that. And then you start to also do what I think is one of the most dangerous things a leader can do to themselves, and that's to isolate yourself. And then when you become isolated, you start carrying all the weight that's happening. So you see an erosion of trust that's happening within yourself when you get to that point when you're allowing anger and frustration and others to dictate sort of the framework that you're operating under. And then I was very active. I was at the time, I had just a couple of years prior to that gotten my 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo, and I was teaching and training, and I was going consistently to work out and doing some things at a boxing gym and some other things. I was heavy. I mean, I was probably just over 280 on the weight side, and I had sort of before that hit a weight where you were starting to see things like pre-diabetic issues. And so there were contributing factors. I'm marginally high blood pressure, but never medicated for it. And honestly tried to avoid doing that. And so when you start to look at what I would call sort of the foundational things that can contribute to it, weight, kind of the pre-diabetic conditions, and I had sleep apnea, and I didn't comply with the treatment, which is to wear the mask and get on the breathing machine every night. And so when you have apnea, your heart stops during the night when you stop breathing. So all of that starts to do it. But I think it in retrospect now, with 7 years almost behind it, I really believe that it was that isolation and anger that started bearing down on me, and having that added effect of all of those things compounded against my heart, and really was made the major contributor to why it ultimately happened.
Yeah, thank you for your vulnerability and for sharing that, Roy. The resentments and the anger is something that I experience a lot also in successful men can have it, and many times in the work that I do with men, it can be that perhaps it's hard sometimes to make amends and to set things right, and it's a lot of ego involved. And as you also mentioned, the corporate world, and many of perhaps the listeners are elbowing their way up to the top of the corporate ladder, and being bypassed is not nice for anyone. So Roy, how did you deal with that then? And have you set things right now in terms of anger and resentments?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I've spent most of the last 7 years working through all of that. Right out of the gate, you recognize the mistakes that you made that contributed to that physical event, but there's an awakening as well as to the impact it was having on your personal, professional, family relationships. So having to deal with what those poor decisions made in isolation on a day-to-day basis, those bear up over time. Having to go back and make those things right and really revisit that. I spent time in counseling to really address what had to happen, how I could, now with somebody, offload some of that weight to process with and really work through with. And whether it was with my wife or my kids or friends, family, coworkers, or otherwise, there's a cascade effect that has to take place for you to make sure that you've left no stone unturned to let something like that sneak back in and really work on it. And, the other thing too is finding that place where you have the ability to release it regularly. So going through my recovery, walking was the only exercise I could do coming out of the gates. And so, it starts with those first few steps out of bed after being in bed in a coma for a week. Then it's a walk around the unit. Then it's 2 walks around the unit. And then when they discharge you, it's 10 minutes outside, 20, 30, 40. Over time, you build that up. And so walking was a place where I could not only work on my physical self, but if I was smart about that time, I could use it for spiritual renewal. I could use it for learning new things. I could use it for communicating and connecting with people. And so each walk takes on a theme, if you will, in terms of how it's helping build me up or rebuild me in those days. And then today, I use that as a means by which to find renewal, spend time, whether it's in meditation or prayer, or maybe I'm learning something new, or connecting with people while I'm outside in nature. Walking is a big component of the math equation for how all that has to come together.
Fantastic, Roy. I absolutely also believe in moving the body in whichever shape or form we like. If that's walking, trekking, swimming, cycling, it doesn't matter as long as we do what we love, right? And Roy, yes, I just want to also go a little bit deeper on the resentments and amends, because I know there's quite a few listeners who are probably sitting there and know that they need to do it, know that they need to set things right. There might be listeners who have not spoken to the parents if they're still alive, or there might be listeners who, have had a fight with a cousin or a brother or a sister, and for 2-3 years perhaps they haven't even spoken. What message would you like to send to them?
So one of the key elements or guiding principles that we talk about in the trust transformation is you take responsibility for your relationships. That doesn't mean you can control it. That doesn't mean that everything's going to work out. But if you take and make the first or initiate, say, the move toward reconciliation, or you take and make that effort to reach out to somebody as an effort in that, then you've done your part and you've taken that first step. You've opened the door, created a moment of vulnerability, humility to step into that space and begin to work on it. Not everyone's going to respond to it. Not everybody has the capacity or the desire maybe to repair it or restore it. So you have to take the parts that you can get and work with it. Most people do. Most people have a spirit and a desire for reconciliation. So you have to, in that process, then be very candid. You have to be very truthful in what parts of it need to be addressed. And then you have to follow up. You've got to, you can't leave it open, take a meeting, shake a hand, walk out and not do something with that. And so those are the harder commitments to make, because it's more comfortable often to just let it go. Now, there are toxic relationships, and so you may come out of something like this and really recognize that you may have done something, but that they did something, and you're not good for each other in that space. And so it's okay to walk away, and is best an opportunity to leave them with their dignity, but not re-engage in a place that's not feeding you in the way it should. Do that. So taking responsibility for the relationship transforms you first. And then if if they're open to it, then it can transform the whole relationship.
Yeah, I love this formula, Roy, and I believe also in what you say, that it's about keeping our side of the street clean, and it's outside our control if the other party will accept our amends or not, but at least we cleaned up our side of the street clean and we can move forward. And as you also say, I fully agree with you, it could be that they're not ready. They might not be on our page. They might go through something difficult and not be ready. But Roy, can you share with us, is there any situation, any relationship that was repaired during this time? Any good example that you can share?
Yeah, there are a few. I mentioned earlier, you recognize where you're not living or up to the standard that you should, and part of the reason why I think I had so much anger and pressure on me is I knew what to do. I wrote the book. That book didn't come out till 25, but I had written everything that's in that book. I had put together the training program. We launched it at Advent Health, and I taught it to people. I spoke about it on a regular basis, and here I was, in many ways, not living up to the standards in that book, which creates a conflict on the inside. There's that. When that battle ensues where you have a clear-cut way that you should be living and you're not, it compounds on it. And so in the aftermath, as I looked at where some relationships had gone off course, with my family, I started seeing myself in a different role, as somebody who was going out and working hard and coming home and maybe not feeling as engaged and making poor decisions off of that. And you just start to see the ruptures on it. And when you wake up having gone through everything that we did, then you gotta address it. And so spending more time at home, spending more time with my wife, with my kids, having deeper and better conversations, being more intentional about what our family is and should be. I have a couple of rules that are in my day and my week. One of them is I try every day to have a meaningful conversation with everyone in my family at some point during every day. So it may be a quick text message because one of my kids is on the run, going somewhere, doing something. It may be that my wife and I are able to sit down and have dinner together. Our kids are all grown, so they're 31, 27, 26, and 24. But all of those touch points, they add up. There's that intentionality in the relationship that wasn't there before. And then the other rule, I'll call it, is we do everything in our power to make sure that one day a week, usually Sunday, we're all sitting around a table together having a meal as best we can. Yeah, it doesn't work out every week, but most weeks I'd say we're pretty consistent about that. And that feeds everything. And it makes the relationships authentic. My wife and I were coming out of church last night with another couple, and I was asking the dad, someone I've known most of my professional career, what he had going on, and he was talking about playing golf with his boys. They have 3 sons. And I said to him, Dave, at 60 years old, I think one of the most rewarding aspects of my life right now is that my children choose to spend time with me. I don't have to coerce them. I don't have to fight for it, but they choose to do that. And I know a lot of guys and ladies at this stage in life who struggle with that or don't have that. And so I would encourage everyone, if you're not making that specific time while they're growing up, if you're not fostering and feeding that time on your schedule, you know what your priorities are by what's in your calendar. And oftentimes family becomes when I get to it, and it can't. It needs to be in your calendar. You need to mark time out every day. Little segments of time are like making small, consistent investments in anything. They compound over time and they pay off in the end.
Wonderful. I'm so happy that you share that, Roy. Indeed, that the connection with our family, our children is so meaningful. And that then, if we go back a little bit to when you were still in the corporate world, as you said, you had a strong career, everything going for you, yet you mentioned about feelings of isolation and so on. And what I recognized, Roy, in my work with senior leaders and especially men, and same was true for me, I didn't have an avenue to discuss my feelings, so I bottled them up, and I thought I should have the answers. And I remember when I went to see my friends during that time, I also didn't want to bother them with it. I didn't reach out to a coach at the time and so on. So can you remember, Roy, how did you deal with those feelings you had? Were you isolated yourself? Did you seek some help back then, or?
So prior to the event, I would tell you I had the best networking and connections that of anyone I knew. I was not lacking for people I could pick up the phone and call for anything, and be there and be there for each other. I think the conditioning that was happening is through isolation, you fall into a series of traps. And the first trap is the idea that I can fix this. I'm strong. I'm capable. I have the skills. I wouldn't be in this job if I didn't. I can fix this. But then as poor decisions begin to add up, you get down other rabbit holes then where you're in a place where not only is your ego lying to you about this idea, but you've put yourself in a place where you're embarrassed for why you're there. And now your pride and your ego are both tag teaming you to say you can't ask for help now. If you ask for help now, you're going to be shamed. You're going to be put in a different place. You're going to lose your job, or you're going to lose your status with those people. And the other demon that gets in your brain is the idea of nobody else is stupid enough to be in this place. The reality is there's not a single thing that most any of us do that somebody else hasn't suffered from, done, experienced, or been hurt by. And so all we have to do is ask. But you get to that next rung of the ladder, and that's where isolation happens. And now you feel alone. You may not be alone. You may, as I said, I had the best network of friends. I had people that would drop everything to help me out if I only asked. And yet there I was making these terrible decisions that were spiraling me down that space, and still performing at my job. I was still doing the work that Advent Health wanted me to do. I was doing it well. We were succeeding in everything that we were doing. But I had created this space that was having a significant impact on my health, my well-being, and the relationships that were closest to me.
So Roy, if I'm hearing you right, you were fully surrounded of people, wonderful people. You had a great network. They were all there. They could have helped you, but you were still not asking. And because that is what I also find, that it's from that getting that awareness and to use the network in the right way. It's that step that is perhaps the blocker for many. We feel fear of being judged, or we should have the answers, both perhaps internally in the company, but also externally with friends and the network. But now in your life, and I'm so happy for your transformation here, Roy, it's your second life indeed. And it took you a near-death event really to transform you here into this new Roy that we're seeing today. And I'm grateful that you are sharing your journey and giving so much hope to anyone else who's going through something. And hopefully it can be a reset for anyone who's listening who knows that they are sitting there with feelings of anger, and might be some amends to do. And I'm sure that most of the listeners also have a network, and it's about using it in the right way is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Maybe you can share a little bit more. What is the work that you do these days, Roy?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I in many ways, what I went through inspires everything that I do today. And just for one technical reference, I was actually medically dead a few times while on the table being fixed. So I'd say the doctors and I joke around about I had a death experience. Not near. There were technically times where I was in that place, but I love the question, because one of the biggest things that came out of this, and just so the listeners are clear, while I would wish this on nobody, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It put me in a place where through that experience, I see value in terms of the human connection, the human condition, and where all of us need to be in life at a whole different level. It transformed what I call my purpose into 4 ideas, and that's love people, be grateful, give generously, and make a difference. So my first day back to work following my recovery was in March of 2020, and it doesn't take long to remember what everyone was doing in March of 2020. We were locking down for the next 2 years. COVID was running crazy and ravaging so many different places. So for the next 2 years, working for a health system, my plate was full, managing and working on leadership and executive communications. But as we got to the end of that in 2022, I looked around and really was able to see the fruits of the work I had done with the trust transformation, because we had launched it as an employee training program at Advent Health. And my co-author and I, at one point, were hosting weekly conversations on Teams with anyone that had gone through the program as therapy, where we would just get together and they could unload, tell stories, exchange ideas, complain, yell, deal with things, because everybody had the grounding of the trust transformation as a means to have the conversation. So on any given call, we'd have 200-300 employees dial in, and a good portion of them participating in it, and in seeing that, and just in seeing how applying the principles to my recovery and to the recovery of the relationships and everything else, I decided that in 22, I should probably go find where I can do this on a broader scale with many more people. And while I still do work with Advent Health hospitals, I've gone out to Colorado and trained leadership teams there, have worked and continue to train leadership teams throughout Florida. I also work with a variety of other companies. I got certified as a coach, published the book, and was able to kind of take all of this forward. So today, my business really falls into 3 buckets. The first is I'll come in and work with a leadership team and take them through the training program, which is the most common way that I work. And that's usually working on a 3-month engagement where we'll spend a month identifying kind of what the culture situation looks like, take the team through the trust transformation itself, and then the outcome of the training day is that we draft what's called a trust contract. And then that contract becomes integrated into the mission, the vision, the values, and the rest of the things that define the culture. And it's both an inspiration and an agreement of accountability, that this is how we're going to treat each other. This is how we're going to prioritize trust and the very specific ways it's going to live out in our culture on a regular basis. And then month number 3 is helping them figure out, what does it look like to ensure sustainability for this? What are the conversations that need to be scheduled? What are the tools that we can develop for that follow-up and process? And then some companies will take advantage of kind of the second leg of the stool of my work, which is the coaching part of it. So while I'm coaching people at the highest level through the execution of it, there may be some specific groups within the organization that I'll develop a coaching relationship with them and try to help them, take a look and see how that works. So that's the team training part of it. That's a little bit of the coaching part. So there's other aspects to the coaching where and I've launched a new online community for leaders. It's when I say new, within the last couple of weeks, I've really put some effort into building it up. It's on a school platform. And so what I'm trying to do there is I've got some training programs and some other content. I'm doing weekly calls that provide some information, education, inspiration, and support. And then there's different levels that people can engage me for my time, for their time, and then how we could work together, both in a programmatic sense where I'll help them get through the program individually that I do for teams, but then also work with them and coach with them. So I've had the blessing of working with large national and international associations, our international airport leadership here in Central Florida, 2 or 3 hospitals in the Advent Health system, a hospital in the HCA healthcare system. So just any number of companies. And one of my favorites right now is, and I just started working with a company that specializes in water use. So for lack of a better term, they're like an engineering firm focused on water. I'm working with the owner right now to really help him manage his leadership team to a place where when he's ready to walk and make his departure and have his exit strategy, everything has a seamless carryover. And if we can create a culture built on trust with that complements what he's invested 50 years in doing, then we'll make that a much better and more seamless departure for him as a small business owner.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Roy, for sharing the great work you do there. And I also want to touch on one word you say. You spoke about being grateful, and I can hear a lot about giving back and so on. And being grateful is something that I found can make a huge impact in people's life, and because it sort of destroys or kills the self-pity or looking at ourselves. And when we start to look at others and giving back, then that transformation is what makes a huge difference in many of the clients I work with. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this part, Roy?
Absolutely. So in the trust transformation, we look at 4 attributes that people really need to see to trust you. So being trusted is the outcome. So the first attribute is to be trustworthy. And with that trustworthiness, there's 8 different principles that we talk about. The first 3 are the anchor principles, I call it. So it begins with integrity. Second is attitude. And third is focus. And then it's that second one where we really emphasize this concept of gratitude. Because what gratitude does for you is it creates a framework that strengthens your ability to take on difficult things, to confront challenging things, because we're not promised a great day every day. In fact, most days there's a little more crap that we have to deal with than ease. But if we have that gratitude for what we have at that higher level, if we set that intention for being grateful, it's so much easier to work with, and because you're less reactive and more responsive. And sometimes we get those words confused, but react is just an emotional, quick, whereas responding is taking the pause to really understand, take it in, and then make a more meaningful engagement with it. Gratitude, my co-author's an emergency room physician. She's amazing. And prior to us working together, she had already been sort of beating the path on preaching gratitude inside of the health system. She had her leadership team. She was running the emergency department at one of our larger hospitals. And she said, for the next 30 days, when you wake up in the morning, you're going to write down 3 things you're grateful for. And before you go to bed at night, you're going to review that list and you're going to add a couple things to it that you recognize throughout the day. And there were a lot of skeptics. There were a lot of physicians that pushed back on her. There were some jaded staff members that says, I don't have time for this kind of stuff. And to a person, at the end of that 30 days, everybody felt the difference in how they worked together, how they performed themselves, how they dealt with conflict, how they were dealing with overwhelming days that they would have, because emergency rooms are that's the front line of the battlefield of healthcare, and life and death decisions are happening on a day-to-day basis. And so all of them acknowledged that I felt like my brain was rewired through this process. So the power of gratitude is in its consistency and its intention and in how you hold yourself accountable for doing it. Because it's easy in the course of the day to wake up in the morning and start reading emails and responding to everything. So for instance, my morning routine, that's one of the non-negotiables, is I acknowledge 3 things, very specific. It's not just my life, my job. It's dinner with Kim last night, the conversation with that friend of mine that I've been meaning to have. And sometimes I'm grateful for bad things, for the things that are sharpening me in that regard. And if you can get to that point, then your resilience is even stronger than you might imagine.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Roy. And gratitude practice is a big one for me as well. And we use it in our amends group. It's really transformational for those who does it. There's a few always who would perhaps, hold back. It's so hard to surrender to that process just to give in and do it. But once you do that, you can start breathing again. There's so many who are just fighting, holding it, right? It's almost like, what do you think, Roy? How should they? Any tips to anyone who's fighting instead of surrendering to the process?
Yeah, I have the way my calendar sets up in Notion, I have a daily journal that when I open the journal, the first question on the journal is, what are the 3 things you're grateful for right now? So it prompts me right there, and I need that. I'm as I'm as susceptible as anybody else to waking up with my hair on fire and running straight to the thing that gets my attention first. But what's settled in on me over the last 7 years is that time you get up. In my case, it's some reading, praying, meditation, scriptures, those things that feed my soul for intention, my soul for integrity, and my soul for how I'm going to approach the day and what that attitude's going to be like. And then diving into movement, exercise, engaging the body in some kind of movement, walking, riding, exercise, weights, whatever it is. But that movement then kind of balances out that my physical and spiritual needs have been met coming out of it. And now I'm ready to really address the things that are going to require the mental capacity that I have. So the whole person's engaged before I start getting into the work that's worrying me.
Sounds like you have a very good practice set up, Roy. These are not the things that we are taught in school, you know. These are, do we have to have deaf experience in order to learn how to do a gratitude list, Roy? What should we do?
Listen, that's why I do this. I'm the great example. Like I said, I have a great network of friends and family and everything else, but I'd allowed myself to isolate and get to a place where I didn't even recognize what was happening. It consumed me in all the worst ways. And so I want to help people not have that experience and be able to see beyond where they are right now, be able to see past the things that are distracting them from being who they can be, which is, like I said, why I've really leaned in this idea of leadership and trust under pressure, because it's that pressure that starts that process. You know, pressure changes us. You know, it's like the old adage of the diamond is made under pressure, but pressure can break somebody if they're not in the right place, if they're not engaged in the right things, if they're not feeding and doing the things that they need to. So I want to give tools that say if you can really fortify trust, beginning with yourself, build the relationships in a more intentional way through these practices, then you're ready. And when things come up, you're much more cognizant of the things that you should do. When you can see trust not as an emotional thing that hangs on the wall in an inspirational speech, but as your operating system for leadership, that changes the game, because there's more things that resonate on a regular basis. There's greater recognition of what's happening, and trust doesn't just happen. It's built through the very intentional things that are happening, whether you recognize it or not.
And Roy, we're coming towards the end of today, but I have one big question for you. If we could turn back time, let's say we go back 20, 25 years in time, you're basically at the director of corporate communication at Advent Health around year 2000. And if you were to sit down with yourself and give you some advice, what would you share and what would you tell yourself?
Well, that's a great question. There's a couple of things. I would first tell myself that you need to lean into what's most important first. And for me, that's my faith, and that really is the grounding and the foundation that keeps me straight on the things that I need to do. The second thing would be always be intentional with your words and your actions, and because everything you say or do is either contributing to or taking away from the trust that people have in you. And I may have told you this story before, but I have 4 kids. I have 3 sons and a daughter. My daughter's the youngest, the only girl. And so when she was 5, she's 24 right now. I came home one Friday and she turned our home into a bracelet factory. And if any of the listeners have little girls, they know what I'm talking about. It's quite the mess to see all these beads that are rolling on over the ground and all the scissor snips of everything that's there. But she gave me this bracelet. She was so proud of it. Said, "Will you wear it?" And I said, "Yes." And it was a holiday weekend, so everywhere we went, I was show and tell. She would show everyone the bracelet, tell everyone everything about each of the beads, why she made it, why she put my name on it. So Tuesday morning comes up, and this will date me a little bit, but I had to get up and put a suit and tie on to go to work. So I put the bracelet on the dresser and went off to work. And when I got home, she was still at it. She had still making bracelets. And as my wife and I are making dinner, she comes in the kitchen and she's got another bracelet. And Nick, I thought to myself, I only have so much arm to give to your cause. And she looks at me and says, Daddy, if you didn't like the other bracelet, would you wear this one? So my daughter had given me a bracelet that I told her I'd wear, and she saw it on my dresser, which meant I wasn't wearing it. So in her 5-year-old brain, the only thing she could figure out was I just didn't like the bracelet. And the irony is, I had just landed my first major speaking event for talking about trust. I had just developed the early concepts of everything we just spent the last 40 minutes talking about, and I'd blown it with my 5-year-old daughter. And so I went back in the bedroom, and I put the bracelet on, and I wear it every day, and this is it. So I wear it for 2 reasons, and then a third thing I want to share before we wrap up. The first reason is I told her I would. We have to do our best to recognize when we've made a commitment to someone and then keep it. Second reason, it reminds me, as I said earlier, that every little thing that we say or do is either contributing to or taking away from the trust people have. And what I want listeners to walk away with is you may make a passing comment to somebody that you don't give a second thought to, but that comment can mean everything to them, good or bad, that day. That may be the most important thing that they've heard. And so you've got to be intentional about that. And the third aspect of where the bracelet really taught me something was the idea of humility, that I have to recognize it's not all about me. It's about what I've been called to do or appointed to do or asked to do. And in that case, it was what I was doing with my daughter and how I committed to her and what I needed to do as part of that commitment. In our work life, it could be the role that we've been given by the company we work for, or the job that we've chosen to pursue, and what does that relationship with our client look like and mean, and how does it define how we're supposed to function? Humility is the key that unlocks that problem of isolation I talked about earlier. Because to your point earlier, Nick, that's what gives us the capacity to stop and say something's wrong and I need help. And I can't do it by myself. I need help. I need to ask a friend. I need to call a coach. I need to hire a consultant. I need to be engaged with a group of people that can see this from the perspective that I can't right now because I've isolated myself. And so humility, often the least talked about quality of leaders, could often be the most important quality that we have to allow ourselves to be helped by those around us.
Thank you so much, Roy, for sharing that beautiful story with your daughter and wearing the bracelet still today, and for the great work that you do for yourself and also for your community and the leaders out there and for your family. Just the last question then, Roy, if anyone want to pick up a copy of your book, The Trust Transformation, where can they get one?
So it's available wherever books are sold, but I sent you a link, and I'm happy if you want to share it with your listeners. I just put together a leadership community on the school platform, and anyone that joins that community can get a copy of the book at a 20% discount. So I've got a link in there that they can grab and then get it for 20% off as a member of my community.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Roy. I'm looking forward to staying in touch and hopefully seeing you somewhere in the world soon. And thanks to all the listeners.
Yeah, have a great one.
Thank you, and bye for now.